Maya Winters had been delivering letters across the Valdrin Empire for 3 years, and in all that time she had learned one important rule, which was to keep her head down and never ask questions about what she carried in her ship, because humans were not important in this empire of dragons and elves and nobles who rode those magnificent beasts across the stars, and she was fine with that because the pay was decent, and the work kept her moving from planet to planet, which was better than sitting in some factory on Earth processing recycled materials like most of her kind. Her only real companion was Ember, and he was not much to look at compared to the massive war dragons that patrolled the Empire territories, because Ember was small and copper-colored and had been injured when Maya found him 3 years ago on a trash moon where she had stopped to make repairs, and the little dragon had been dying with a broken wing and burns across his scales, and Maya had brought him aboard her courier ship and nursed him back to health, even though keeping a dragon without noble permission was technically illegal, but no noble house would want such a weak creature anyway. Job that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning when Maya was restocking supplies at Port Valen on the Outer Rim territories, and a hooded figure approached her ship and offered her a delivery contract that paid more than she usually made in 6 months, and the package was a single black envelope, sealed with wax that bore no house insignia, and the destination was the Imperial Core, which was a place Maya had never been allowed to visit before, because only nobles and their servants traveled to Draconis Prime, where the Empress herself lived. In towers that touched the clouds, Maya knew she should refuse, because something about this job felt wrong in her gut. But the money was enough to buy her own station somewhere, and stop living ship to ship, and maybe even get proper medical treatment. For Ember, whose wing had never healed quite right and still caused him pain when he flew, so she took the contract and loaded the black envelope into her secure cargo hold and set course for the Imperial Core, which was a journey that would take 2 weeks through multiple checkpoints and inspection stations. First strange thing happened at Checkpoint Gamma, which was a military outpost that guarded the border between Outer and Middle Territories, and Maya transmitted her credentials and cargo manifests and waited for the usual inspection routine, but instead of the normal patrol ship that would scan her vessel and wave her through something else appeared on her sensors, and it was big, and when she looked out the viewport, she saw 3 massive war dragons approaching with riders in full battle armor, and these were not small patrol beasts, but apex predators that had scales like black metal and wings that blotted out the stars. Maya felt her heart racing, because war dragons only deployed for serious threats like pirate fleets or rebel uprisings, and her little courier ship was neither of those things, and she started to transmit an explanation, but before she could finish her message, the 3 war dragons did something that made no sense at all, because they circled her ship once, and then they bowed, and Maya had lived in the Empire long enough to know what a dragon bow looked like, because it was a gesture of respect that dragons only gave to their bonded riders, or to the Imperial family, and certainly not to a random human courier in a beat-up cargo ship. Dragon riders seemed just as confused as Maya was, because their beasts were bowing without command, and one of the riders transmitted a message asking Maya who she was and what house she served, and Maya replied that she served no house. It was just a courier, and there was a long silence before the checkpoint commander came on the line and told her she was cleared to proceed without inspection and to have a safe journey, and the war dragons moved aside, still holding their bowed positions, till her ship passed, and then they returned to their patrol routes. Maya sat in her pilot's chair for a long time trying to make sense of what had happened, and Ember was acting strange too, because the little copper dragon was pacing back and forth in the cargo bay, making sounds she had never heard from him before, and when she went back to check on him, she saw that his scales were glowing faintly, with patterns that looked almost like writing in a language she did not recognize. The second checkpoint was even stranger, because this time there were 5 war dragons and an entire battle cruiser, and they all bowed as her ship approached, and the station commander did not even ask for her credentials before clearing her through, and Maya started to feel afraid, because something was very wrong, and maybe the black envelope in her cargo hold was more dangerous than she thought, and maybe she should turn around and go back, but she was already too far into Imperial space, and turning back now would look suspicious and probably get her arrested at The third checkpoint, Maya tried to act normal and transmitted her approach vector, but before the patrol could respond, every dragon at the station, which was at least 20 of them, all turned toward her ship and bowed at the same time, and their riders were shouting in confusion, and some of them were trying to force their dragons to stand. But the beasts would not obey, and Maya heard one rider screaming that his dragon had never disobeyed before in 15 years of bonding. Ember was changing, and Maya could see it now, because his copper scales were turning brighter and the patterns on his hide were spreading, and he had grown larger somehow, even though dragons did not grow that fast. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw something ancient and aware looking back at her, and it terrified her, because this was not the injured baby dragon she had rescued and nursed back to health. Maya opened her communication logs and found an encrypted message that had arrived while she slept, and when she decoded it using her personal key, the message was short and direct, and it said that they knew what she carried and that she should turn back now, or the Empire would burn, and there was no signature and no way to trace where it came from. She stood in the cockpit, looking at the black envelope and the cargo hold visible through the security cameras, and she looked at Ember, who was staring at her with those ancient eyes, and she thought about turning back and forgetting this whole job, but something inside her refused to run, and maybe it was pride, or maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else entirely, but Maya Winters made a decision that would change everything, and she set course for the next checkpoint and kept flying toward the Imperial core, where answers waited in towers that touched the clouds. Maya decided to learn everything she could about dragons while her ship traveled through the long, empty space between checkpoints, and she accessed the public records database that every courier ship carried and started searching for information about dragon behavior and bonding rituals, and what she found made her more confused than before, because according to every official document, dragons only bowed to their bonded riders or to members of the Imperial family, and there was no mention of dragons bowing to random humans, and certainly no mention of all dragons at a checkpoint bowing simultaneously to a passing courier ship. The more she read, the more she noticed gaps in the historical records, and there were references to something called the First Flight, which happened 10,000 years ago, but when she tried to access those files, they were classified at the highest Imperial level, and she did not have clearance, and that made her suspicious, because why would ancient history need military-level classification unless someone was hiding something important? Ember was definitely changing, and by the fourth day of travel, he had doubled in size, and his copper scales had turned into something else entirely, because now they looked like crystal or glass, and they reflected light in strange ways, and the patterns that covered his body were definitely writing in some language that Maya did not recognize. But the strange thing was that when she looked at the symbols, she felt like she should understand them, like they were familiar somehow, even though she had never seen them before them. The ship needed refueling at Station Kyo, which was a civilian port halfway between the Outer Rim and the Imperial core, and Maya docked her ship and started the fuel transfer, and while she waited, she went to the station bar because she needed to think and maybe find someone who could explain what was happening to her. The bar was crowded with traders and station workers and a few off-duty soldiers, and Maya sat at the counter and ordered water because she could not afford to drink alcohol when she was flying, and that was when a woman approached her and sat down on the next stool, and the woman was older with gray hair and tired eyes, and she introduced herself as Dr. Chloe Martinez and said she was a xenobiologist who studied alien species. Chloe looked at Maya for a long moment and then asked if she had a dragon. And Maya said yes, a small one, and Chloe asked too. See it, and Maya was suspicious, but something about the woman seemed genuine, so she took Chloe back to her ship, and when they entered the cargo bay, Chloe stopped dead and stared at Ember, who was sleeping in the corner with his crystal scales glowing faintly, and Chloe whispered that it was impossible. Maya asked what was impossible, and Chloe pointed at the patterns on Ember and said that those were not bonding marks, and Maya asked what they were then, and Chloe said they were coronation seals. And Maya did not understand what that meant, so Chloe explained that dragons did not just bond with riders, but that they recognized sovereignty, and that the current empire was built on a lie that had lasted 10,000 years. Chloe told Maya to sit down because the story was long and complicated, and then she began to explain that the Valdoran Empire had not always been ruled by elf noble houses, and that long ago, before the elves took power, there had been another race that commanded the dragons, and they were called the Starborn, and they had created the empire and raised the dragons from primitive beasts into intelligent creatures capable of traveling between stars and bonding with riders. The Starborn had ruled for thousands of years, but then something happened that was erased from all official records, and in a single night the Starborn vanished, and the elf houses that served them as administrators and generals suddenly claimed power and took control of the dragons, and established the noble house system that existed today. But the dragons never forgot, and somewhere, deep in their genetic memory, they still remembered their first masters and still waited for them to return. Maya asked what this had to do with her, and Chloe pointed at Ember and said that prism drakes were the personal guards of Starborn queens, and they had been extinct for 10,000 years, and yet here was one in her cargo bay, and it had bonded with her and was showing coronation seals, which meant that Maya herself carried Starborn blood, and the dragons recognized it, and that was why they were bowing to her. Maya laughed because it was ridiculous, and she was just a human courier who had been raised in an orphanage on Earth and had no family and no special heritage. But Chloe asked her if she knew where she came from, and Maya admitted that she had been found as a baby on a derelict ship with no records and no identification, and the orphanage had given her the name Winters because she was found in December. Chloe said that the elf houses had spent 10,000 years hunting down and eliminating anyone with Starborn blood because the dragon's loyalty could not be commanded, only recognized, and if anyone with the true bloodline appeared, the dragons would have to choose between their current riders and their original oath, and that would tear the empire apart. Before Maya could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the station, and Chloe grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the airlock, saying they needed to leave now, and Maya asked why, and Chloe said that House Corval had assassins on the station, and they were coming for her. Maya ran back to her ship with Chloe following, and she started emergency launch procedures, but before they could disconnect from the station docking clamps, an explosion rocked the port and through the viewport. Maya saw armed soldiers in Corval house colors rushing toward her ship, and behind them came 3 bonded dragons with riders in combat armor. Woke up and saw the threat, and something changed in the little dragon, because he was not little anymore, and he opened his mouth, and white fire poured out, and it was not normal dragon fire but something else entirely, because it consumed everything it touched and turned the attackers to ash in seconds. And the Corval dragons tried to attack, but when they saw Ember, they stopped, and they bowed, and their riders screamed in rage and tried to force them to fight, but the dragons would not obey her, got her ship free from the docking clamps, and launched while the station descended into chaos. Because every dragon at Station Kyo was bowing toward her departing vessel, and their riders had lost control, and she could hear transmissions of people demanding to know what was happening and who she was. Chloe sat in the co-pilot's seat, breathing hard, and Maya asked her how she knew to warn her, and Chloe looked away and said she had been watching Maya since she took the contract, because Chloe worked for House Corval and had been sent to identify her. But seeing Ember had changed everything, because Chloe had spent her whole life studying dragons, and she knew the truth when she saw it. Maya should have been angry, but she was too tired and too confused, and she just asked Chloe what the black envelope in her cargo hold contained, and Chloe said she did not know, but someone clearly wanted Maya to reach the Imperial core, and that someone had enough power to arrange safe passage through military checkpoints. Maya finally opened the black envelope, even though she was not supposed to until delivery, and inside it was a single piece of paper with one sentence written in that same strange language she could not read but somehow understood, and it said that the daughter of the Morning Star would walk among dragons, and they would remember their first oath. And Maya Winters sat in her pilot's chair and realized that her life as a simple courier was over. The journey to Draconis Prime took another week, and during that time, Maya learned to read the ancient language that appeared on the paper and on Ember, and it was not really learning, because the knowledge was already inside her, somehow waiting to be remembered, and Chloe helped her understand what she was reading, and it was all about the old empire and the covenant between Starborn and dragons, and how the bond was not slavery but partnership, and mutual respect temper continued to grow. And by the time they reached the imperial core, he was the size of a house, and his crystal scales could reflect entire star fields, and he could speak. Now, not with words, but with thoughts that Maya could hear in her mind, and he told her that he had been waiting for her his whole life, even though he had not known it, and that his kind had pretended to be weak. Copper dragons for 10,000 years, hiding among the lesser breeds and waiting for the bloodline to return when they entered Draconis. Prime Space Maya expected to be arrested or attacked, but instead, an imperial escort arrived, and it was a full honor guard of royal dragons, and they bowed to her ship and guided her to the palace landing platforms, and Maya could see the capital city below, with its towers that reached into the clouds and millions of people and hundreds of dragons flying between buildings, and she wondered how many of them knew the truth about the Empire. The Empress herself was waiting on the landing platform, and her name was Lady Victoria Kane, and she was tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes that looked ancient, and she was surrounded by guards and advisors, but she walked forward, alone, to greet Maya, and when she spoke, her voice was kind, but also sad, and she said she had been waiting a long time for this meeting. Victoria took Maya to a private chamber in the highest tower, and Chloe came too, because Maya insisted, and Victoria did not object, and once they were alone with just a few trusted guards, Victoria told Maya the full truth about what had happened 10,000 years ago. Starborn had not vanished because they wanted to, and they had not abandoned the Empire. And what happened was betrayal on a scale that was almost impossible to comprehend, because the elf noble houses who served as generals and administrators had grown jealous of Starborn power, and they had made a plan to take everything. The houses poisoned the Starborn over decades using a slow-acting toxin that weakened their connection to the dragons and made them sick and confused, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late, and the Starborn population collapsed and billions died, and the survivors were hunted down and killed. And their children were taken and scattered across the Empire and hidden. Among normal human populations, Victoria herself was part Starborn, and that was why she had risen to become Empress, because she had enough of the blood for dragons to respect her, but not enough for them to fully recognize her sovereignty, and she had spent her entire reign searching for pure bloodline descendants and protecting them when she found them, but there were so few left, and most died before reaching adulthood. Because the noble houses had agents everywhere? Aya asked why. Victoria had sent her the letter and arranged her journey, and Victoria said she had not sent anything, and Maya showed her the black envelope, and Victoria examined it, and her face went pale because the seal was older than the current empire, and it was a seal that only one person could have made, and that person had been dead for 10,000 years. Someone else knew about Maya and wanted her to reach the imperial core, and they had power enough to bypass security and arrange safe passage, and that meant there were other forces at work, and Victoria did not know if they were allies or enemies. Victoria gave Maya a choice, and she said Maya could hide and Victoria would protect her and give her a new identity, and she could live a quiet life and never use her bloodline power, or Maya could claim her birthright and reveal herself to the Empire and start a war that would tear civilization apart, because the dragon's loyalty could not be divided, and if Maya walked into the grand assembly where all the noble houses gathered, the dragons would bow, and the lords would have to choose between killing her or accepting that their entire empire was built on genocide and lies. Maya asked what would happen to normal humans if she started a war, and Victoria said honestly that many would die because the noble houses would not give up power without fighting, and they controlled the military and the economy and the food production. And even if Maya won the war, it might destroy the infrastructure that kept billions of people alive. Chloe, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke and said that Maya should know. There were others like her, and the bloodline had not been fully erased, and Victoria had been searching, but there were at least 3 other pure descendants alive and scattered across the empire. And if Maya could find them and bring them together, they would be stronger and have a better chance of surviving what was coming before Maya could decide anything. Alarms started ringing throughout the palace, and guards rushed in saying that House Corvell had made a formal accusation that Maya was an imposter and a fraud, and they were demanding her arrest and execution, and they had brought an army to Draconis Prime and were surrounding the palace. Victoria looked tired and said she could protect Maya for a while, but House Corvel was powerful and had many allies, and eventually they would force a confrontation, and Maya asked how much time she had, and Victoria said maybe a day and maybe less. Maya made her decision, and she said she would not hide and would not run, and if the noble houses wanted to kill her, they could try, but she would walk into the Grand Assembly and let the dragons decide. And Victoria warned her that this meant war, and Maya said the war had already started 10,000 years ago. It was time to finish. If they prepared through the night, and Victoria gave Maya armor that had belonged to the last starborn queen, and it was made of the same crystal material as Ember, and when Maya put it on, it felt like coming home, and the armor bonded to her skin and became part of her, and she could feel power flowing through it. Timber stood beside her, and he was magnificent, now with wings that could block out the sun and scales that reflected the light of 1,000 stars, and he told her through their mental link that he would die for her if needed, and Maya told him she would rather they both live. The Grand Assembly was held in the largest chamber of the palace, and all the dragon-bonded lords were required to attend, and Maya could see hundreds of elf nobles in their house colors, and behind them through massive windows were there dragons perched on towers and platforms, and there were thousands of them. Victoria announced that she was presenting a claimant to the ancient throne, and the lords erupted in anger and shouted that it was impossible and that the starborn were extinct. And some drew weapons, and their guards moved forward. Maya walked into the center of the chamber wearing the crystal armor, and Ember walked beside her. In the moment she entered, every single dragon visible through the windows bowed, and the sound of their movement was like thunder, and the chamber fell silent. The noble lords stared in shock, and then in rage, and the Lord of House Corvel, who was a man named Adrian Stone, stepped forward and declared that Maya was a pretender and a fraud and a trod, that he would prove it by defeating her in single combat, and if she refused, she would be branded a coward and executed. Maya had never fought anyone in her life, and she was a courier, not a warrior, but she looked at Adrian Stone and said she accepted. And Victoria tried to object, but Maya silenced her because this was the only way forward. Combat would be held at dawn, and it would be dragon against dragon and rider against rider, and the winner would live and the loser would die. And Maya Winters went back to her chambers to prepare, knowing that tomorrow she would either become the spark that reignited her people or she would die, and the truth would die with her. Dawn came too quickly, and Maya stood in the arena, wearing her crystal armor, while thousands watched from the stands and millions more watched on broadcasts across the empire, and she could feel her heart pounding, but Ember was calm beside her, and his presence gave her strength, and he whispered in her mind that she was not alone, and that 10,000 years of waiting had led to this moment. Adrian Stone arrived riding a massive black war dragon named Shadowfang, and the beast was scarred from 100 battles, and its eyes glowed red with rage, and Adrian wore the traditional armor of House Corvel, which was black metal, inscribed with runes of domination, and he carried a plasma lance that could pierce ship holes, and he looked at Maya with contempt because she was just a courier and he was a lord who had trained for war since childhood. The rules were simple, and the fight would continue until one rider yielded or died, and all weapons were permitted, and the dragons could use their full power. And Victoria stood in the royal box looking worried, and Chloe was beside her, and Maya could see other faces in the crowd, and some looked hopeful and others looked afraid, and many looked angry. Signal horn blew, and Adrian charged immediately, and Shadowfang moved with terrible speed, and Adrian brought his lance down toward Maya. But Ember was faster, and he dodged, and his crystal scales deflected the energy blast, and Maya held on tight as Ember took flight and rose into the air above the arena. Shadowfang followed, and the two dragons circled each other, and Adrian was laughing because he thought this would be easy, but then Ember did something that made the crowd gasp, because he stopped flying and hung in the air without moving his wings, and his crystal body began to glow, and light poured from him in waves, and wherever the light touched. Shadowfang the black dragon slowed and seemed confused. Adrian shouted commands, but Shadowfang was not responding, and the war dragon shook his head like he was trying to clear it, and then Shadowfang looked at Ember and recognized what he was seeing, and the black dragon bowed in midair, and Adrian screamed in rage and struck his own dragon, trying to force obedience, but Shadow Fang would not attack thee. Crowd was in chaos, and the noble lords were shouting that the fight was invalid and that Maya had cheated and used forbidden magic, but Victoria stood and declared that no rules had been broken and that the dragons were simply recognizing truth. Adrian abandoned his dragon and leaped from Shadowfang and activated his armor. Jets and flew directly at Maya with his plasma lance, and he was insane with rage, and Maya had no weapon and did not know how to fight, but her armor responded to her fear, and crystal shields materialized around her and blocked Adrian's attack. They fought in the air above the arena, and Adrian had skill and experience, but Maya had something else, and her armor seemed to know what to do even when she did not, and it moved her body and blocked attacks and created weapons from crystallized light. And slowly Maya began to understand that she was not controlling the armor, but remembering how to use it. The fight lasted an hour, and Adrian grew tired, but Maya did not, because her armor was feeding her energy. And finally, Adrian made a mistake, and Maya struck him with a crystal blade, and it cut through his armor, and he fell, and Shadowfang caught him before he hit the ground, and the black dragon carried his wounded rider from the arena, and the fight was over. Maya had won, but she knew this was just the beginning, and as she landed, she saw that half the noble houses were already leaving, and their dragons were following reluctantly, and Victoria told her that the empire was fracturing and that war was coming within. A weak 3 factions formed, and the first was the loyalist houses, who rejected Maya and would fight to preserve the current order, and they controlled most of the military and had thousands of dragons and millions of soldiers, and they were led by House Corvel and House Vex and House Darkstone. The second faction was the Starborn Coalition, and it was made of humans who had learned the truth, and some elf houses who believed the genocide was wrong, and dragons who had broken their bonds to follow.
Yeah.
And it was smaller and weaker, but it was growing, and every day more people joined the third faction was the Neutral Holds, and these were houses that wanted to wait and see who would win before choosing sides, and Victoria told Maya that winning over the Neutral Holds would decide the war. Maya could not lead an army because she had never commanded anything, and she did not understand military strategy, but Victoria introduced her to General Amanda. Price, and Amanda was human and had served in the Imperial Navy for 20 years and had recently defected with her entire fleet, and Amanda looked at Maya and said she would follow her, not because of bloodline, but because the truth mattered. Though war began in earnest when House Corvel attacked a colony world that had declared for Maya, and they burned the cities and killed thousands and the dragons who served. House Corvel did so reluctantly, and some broke their bonds mid-battle and refused to continue, and the Corvel riders executed their own dragons for disobedience, and that act turned many neutral houses against them. Maya traveled to different worlds, looking for the other Starborn descendants, and she found Helen Cross on a mining colony, and Helen was older and had spent her life working in the mines, and when Maya arrived, all the Earth dragons on the planet bowed to Helen, and Helen cried because she had always felt different and wrong, and now she understood why the second descendant was Nina Vale, and she was a slave on a farming world, and when Maya freed her, the agricultural dragons became calm for the first time in years, and Nina could make even feral dragons peaceful with just her presence. The third was Beth Rivers, and she was only 12 years old and lived on a remote research station, and she had been having dreams in the old language and drawing the ancient symbols, and when Maya met her, Beth said she had been waiting and she knew Maya would come together. The 4 of them were stronger, and when they stood together, every dragon within range would bow, and the loyalist houses became desperate, and they knew they could not win if the Starborn United House Corvel revealed a secret weapon, and it was called the Void Engine, and it was a device built from forbidden technology, and it could sever the bond between dragons and all masters permanently, and if activated, it would drive every dragon in the Empire insane and turn them into mindless beasts. The Loyalists planned to use the Void Engine. It's a final option, and they said if they could not have the dragons, then no one would, and Victoria Intelligence Network discovered. The plan and Maya had to make a choice about whether to attack the facility where the engine was kept or to defend the worlds that were currently under siege. Amanda advised defense, but Maya chose to attack because if the void engine activated, the war would not matter and everything would be destroyed, and so they gathered their forces and prepared for the most. The dangerous mission of the war, the facility, was defended by 1,000 war dragons and 10,000 soldiers, and it was located in deep space, far from any inhabited world, and Maya led the attack personally with Ember and the other Starborn descendants and Amanda Fleetha. Battle was terrible, and many died and dragons fought dragons, and the space around the facility became filled with debris and fire, and Maya pushed through the defenses and reached the facility core where the void engine was being prepared for. Activation. Adrian Stone was there, and he was wounded from their first fight, but he was determined to activate the engine, and he told Maya that she had destroyed the Empire, and now he would destroy everything, and he began the activation sequence. Samber saw what was happening, and he told Maya through their bond that there was only one way to stop the engine. And a prism drake could absorb the destructive energy, but it would kill him, and Maya screamed no and tried to find another way, but there was no time. Ember flew directly into the void engine core, and his crystal body began to absorb the energy. And he grew brighter and brighter until he was like a star, and Maya could feel his pain through their bond, and she begged him to stop, but he told her he loved her and that this was what he was born to do. And then he dissolved into pure light. Explosion destroyed the facility and the void engine and Adrian Stone and everything within 1,000 kilometers, but Maya survived because Ember had used the last of his strength to shield her, and when the light faded, she was alone, floating in space in her crystal armor, and Ember was Gamaya. Thought she had lost everything, but then she heard his voice, and it was not just in her mind, but everywhere. An Ember consciousness had merged with every dragon in the Empire, and for the first time in 10,000 years, all dragons remembered everything, and they remembered the betrayal and the genocide and the lies. The dragons made their choice, and they broke their bonds with the loyalist houses, and they returned to their worlds and territories and declared themselves free, and the war ended not with a final battle, but with a simple refusal, and the noble houses that had ruled for 10,000 years found themselves without dragons and without power. Maya Winters floated in space and cried for her friend and for everything that had been lost. But she could still hear Ember's voice telling her it was not over and that something new was beginning. The war ended, but the work of building something new had just begun. And Maya returned to Dracona's Prime to find the city in chaos, because the old order had collapsed, and the noble houses had lost their power, and millions of people did not know what would happen next, and they were afraid. Victoria called for a gathering of all factions, and it took 3 months to organize, but eventually representatives from every world came to the capital, and they included humans and elves and even some Sicilians, and even some of the former noble houses who had renounced their claims to dragon ownership, and they came to decide what the Empire would become. Maya stood before the assembly, and she could have claimed absolute power because the dragons recognized her sovereignty. But she did not want to rule the way the Starborn had ruled before. She did not want to replace one empire with another, and so she proposed something different. She called it the New Covenant, and it was based on the original partnership between Starborn and dragons before everything went wrong, and the principles were simple. And the first was that dragons were not property and could not be owned, and they had the right to choose their own territories and their own lives. The second principle was that humans, both those with Starborn blood and those without, would reclaim their heritage, but not as masters, and they would work with dragons as partners, and the bond between rider and dragon would be mutual and consensual. The third principle was that the elf houses would not be destroyed or punished, but they had to earn dragon partnerships through deeds and character, and not through birthright or force, and any house that tried to enslave dragons or claim ownership would be exiled. Assembly debated for weeks, and some wanted harsher terms, and others wanted more lenient ones, and Maya listened to everyone and tried to find compromise, and slowly a new government began to reform. The dragons established their own territories, and they chose representatives to speak for them, and the largest dragon councils were on worlds with vast open spaces where they could fly free and hunt and raise their young, and many Dragons chose to remain bonded with their riders, but now it was a choice and not compulsion. Maya became the first speaker of the new covenant. And it was not a throne, but a position of mediation, and she helped resolve disputes between dragons and humans and between different factions, and it was exhausting work. And sometimes she missed being a simple courier. The other Starborn descendants formed a council with her and Helen. Cross managed the economic transition and helped mining colonies adapt to working with dragons as partners, and Nina Vale established sanctuaries for feral dragons and helped them heal from centuries of forced bonding. And Beth Rivers was young, but she had a gift for teaching, and she started schools where human children and young dragons could learn together. Ember was still with Maya, but in a different way, and his consciousness lived in the collective dragon awareness. And sometimes she could feel him more strongly, and he could manifest as light or as a voice in her mind. And he told her he was happy because he was part of something greater now, and he was connected to every dragon in the Empire. 6 months after the war ended, Maya received another letter, and it arrived the same way the first one had, with no indication of who sent it. And when she opened it, the message was written in the old language, and it said that the Starborn were not the first, and that the dragons remembered. What came before the letter told her that when she was ready to know the truth, she should follow the song of the first stars. And it gave coordinates to a location beyond the Empire borders in deep space where no ships returned, and Maya showed the letter to Victoria and to the other Starborn descendants. They debated what to do, and some thought it was a trap, and others thought it was a test, and Maya believed it was an invitation, and she decided she would go and see what was out there. But first, she had responsibilities to the new covenant and to the people who depended on Hera. Year passed, and the Empire transformed. And it was not easy, and there were conflicts and setbacks, and some former noble houses tried to rebel and reclaim power, but they were stopped, and gradually people adapted to the new way of living. Humans discovered their heritage and learned that they were descendants of the Starborn, and it changed how they saw themselves, and many joined the Explorer Corps and traveled to distant worlds, and some bonded with dragons, and others pursued different paths. The elf houses struggled more because they had lost everything, and their entire culture had been built on dragon ownership and superiority. But some adapted and found new purpose, and they worked alongside humans and dragons, and slowly earned trust. Maya stood on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt capital, and she watched dragons flying freely through the sky, and there were thousands of them in every color and size. And they were not slaves or weapons, but living beings with their own dreams and purpose. Sember manifested beside her as light, and he asked if she was happy, and Maya said she was tired, but yes, she was happy, and he told her that he was proud of her and that she had done what seemed impossible. She asked him about the letter and the song of the first stars, and Ember said that there were secrets older than the Empire and older than the Starborn, and that the dragons had memories that went back millions of years, and those memories spoke of others who came before and who left something behind. Maya decided it was time, and she gathered a crew for an exploration mission, and Amanda Price volunteered to command the ship, and Helen and Nina and Beth all insisted on coming, and Victoria gave them the fastest ship in the fleet and equipped it with the best technology. They prepared for departure, and Maya gave instructions to the council about what to do in her absence, and she appointed temporary leaders and made sure the new covenant would continue even if she did not return on the day they left. Thousands gathered to see them off, and dragons filled the sky, and Ember presence was strong, and Maya could feel the collective awareness of every dragon in the Empire, watching and watch. The ship launched, and they set course for the coordinates from the letter, and it would take months to reach the location because it was beyond mapped space and into the region called the Dark Beyond, where ancient things were said to dwell. Maya stood on the bridge and looked at the stars, and she thought about everything that had happened and how her life had changed from delivering letters to leading a revolution, and she wondered what would come next. Deborah's voice whispered in her mind, and he said that she was never just delivering letters, and that she was delivering them all from a lie, and now she would deliver them to the truth, whatever that truth might be. Ship jumped to faster than light travel, and they left the Empire behind, and headed into unknown space, and Maya did not know what they would find, but she was not afraid because she had friends beside her and dragons, watching over her, and a purpose that burned bright in her heart behind them. The new covenant grew stronger, and humans and dragons, and even some elves built something better than what came before, and they learned to live together, not as masters and servants, but as partners and friends. Ahead of them lay mysteries and dangers, and possibly answers to questions that had haunted the Empire for 10,000 years. And Maya Winters, who had once been a simple courier, was ready to face whatever came next, because she had learned that destiny was not about blood or heritage, but about choices and courage. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and somewhere in that vast darkness, the song of the first stars was waiting, and Maya knew that when she found it, everything would change again, but this time she would not face it alone, and the dragons would remember, and humanity would remember, and together they would build a future worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them. Here Umber light shone bright beside her, and Maya smiled and whispered thank you to the friend who had saved her, and who had saved them all, and in the collective consciousness of every dragon in the Empire, Ember smiled back and told her the journey was just beginning.